in 2018, attempting to become the first person in history to cross the entire continent of Antarctica solo, unsupported, as you mentioned. So that means no resupplies of food or fuel along the way.
Colin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I was really interested in one of your stories that you were talking about in your first book, Impossible First, which was how you rode across the Drake Passage, which, of course, laymanly, I want to say, like, what the F was going through your mind through that entire experience? And really sort of, how did you hold it together? So, in fact, why don't we start there, man? So for those that don't know, Drake Passage is one of the most treacherous places to cross in the ocean.
Yep. It's so Drake Passage is the waterway between the southern tip of South America and Antarctica. And it is where the Atlantic, Pacific Ocean, and the Southern Ocean all converge. So basically, there's all these crazy ocean currents coming from opposing directions. It's also super far south. So you've got icebergs and literally freezing cold ocean water, about 32 Fahrenheit with the salt. It barely keeps it not fully ice. It's widely considered the most dangerous stretch of ocean in the world. I mean, historically, there have been countless shipwrecks out there, and not just, going back hundreds of years, that's the case, but as recently as I believe it was 2012. So in the last 10 years, a cruise ship sunk in the Drake Passage due to the crazy storms and weather. So needless to say, it is a bad, crazy stretch of ocean. It's about 750 miles across, and me and a team attempted in 2019 to become the first people in history, and we were successful to make a crossing of the Drake Passage in a fully human-powered rowboat. So no motor, no sail, certainly no fancy cruise ship. It was a about 28 foot long, about 3 feet off the water, open hull rowboat. We battled 30, 40-foot swells, icebergs, crazy fatigue, exhaustion, and managed to just barely make it out the other end alive, safe and sound.
Well, but you did make it out. And, what's going through my head was, whose idea was this? Who was the one that said, hey, by the way, guys, do you want to get in a boat together and we'll keep rowing across and we'll do it day after day after day after day? How did it all come together? I mean,
I had never rowed a boat, not literally anywhere in my life before planning to do this project. So that kind of gives you a sense of my mindset, which dive headfirst in the deep end kind of person. Ocean rowing is something I had been curious about in the past. There's, I've read stories, people rowing across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Obviously, it's not something done super commonly, but a couple dozen people do these oceans every single year. And I've read about these adventures, being an adventurer myself. But I got introduced to a guy named Fionn Paul, who's an Icelandic explorer who's really focused on ocean rowing. He has more, world records and has rowed all the major oceans in the world and really kind of focused on this sport. And we got introduced by a mutual friend who said, Fionn's been kind of thinking about this row, kind of seems pretty out there, but no one's done it, but you've been to Antarctica. So, there's all this sort of complications of being in Antarctica and the red tape and the paperwork and how well it's protected, which is amazing. But it's a complicated place to honestly, logistically operate. And so him and I sat down and had a meeting of the mind, so to speak, in early 2019. And pretty quickly realized that we had some complementary skill sets as well as a common passion to try this crazy, ridiculous thing. We kind of went from there and built the project from that standpoint.
Wow. So, what do you look for in some of these projects? I mean, the adventure and the endurance. I mean, you're an endurance athlete. Are there things that you specifically look for? Like, in other words, if no one's done it, we want to do it?
Yeah, I think there's been an evolution over time. Certainly I was incredibly proud to become the first person in history to make the solo, unsupported, unaided crossing of the continent of Antarctica on foot. And then obviously it was great to do a world first with this ocean row. Before that, I had set some speed records in mountaineering, which I'm also really proud of. I think it's been an evolution in the sense of, it's kind of fun to discover these projects that no one has ever done before. But it can easily on the surface sound like that's very ego driven, like, oh, I want to plant my flag in history and do this thing that no one's ever done. And it'd be disingenuous to say that's never crossed my mind. But the more curiosity for me has to do with, it's fun when there's not, for me anyways, when there's not a blueprint, when you can't like call somebody else and say like, cool, so how'd you do this? Like actually you're creating something from scratch. I think of it at this point in my life more akin to art, or entrepreneurship or creativity. It's like problem solving at the highest level, literally life and death stakes problem solving, and figuring out, can my body, can my mind, can logistically, can this be pulled off? And there's a deep satisfaction when it can. So for me, it's not always about, it's never been done before. Last summer, I summited Mount Everest. It was my second time, but I summited with my wife. It wasn't a world record, but we had an incredible, my wife, who's not, a core, outdoors person, that's not her core identity. To get her and stand on the top of the world with her, she's only the 88th American female of all time to summit Mount Everest. That was a unique and beautiful experience in its own way, and not a world first, not a world record, not any of that, but just an incredible adventure with somebody that of course I deeply love, and to have that shared experience is beautiful. So for me, it can be many different things when I'm thinking about what to do next.
Amazing. As you were talking, I was just thinking about how brilliant you must be from a mindset standpoint from this experience, because as you said, the requirement to problem solve, to adapt, to be fluid, to think on your feet, to do that under pressure. I mean, we think about Navy SEALs and the pressure they train under in order to focus. It'd be really interesting to do some MRIs of your brain and really get to see what all those mechanics are, right? Wow, that's an amazing thing. So I want to talk to you about obviously Antarctica and soloing across that, and get into it. But just before we go there, what's your next project? Are you planning anything in the works right now?
I have not announced anything publicly in terms of my next big expedition. There's always a laundry list of ideas that I have, so I'm cultivating some of those right now. I know we'll probably talk about it deeper on this podcast, but the thing that I'm really passionate right now about is my new book that just came out, The 12-Hour Walk, and it's a book about mindset. It's a book about how we can conquer our minds and overcome limiting beliefs. But at its core, it's really a call to action. So it's more than just a book. It's really a global movement where I invite people to walk out their own front door, put their phone in airplane mode, no music, no podcast, no inputs, and go on a 12-hour walk in the stillness and silence of their own mind. And I've seen this be completely life-changing. There's people in every time zone across the world doing this walk almost every single day, thousands and thousands of people. And it's this beautiful, simple, free, accessible thing that has a really deep impact. So one of my biggest passions right now, and then that came out of my Antarctica expedition. Like I said, we can talk more about the origin of that and why 12 hours and all that kind of stuff. But more than anything, like I said, my own passion is to continue to explore and push my own boundaries, but also in a way that has a ripple effect of impact and positivity in the world as a whole.
It's amazing, man. The world needs more of you, man. So on the 12-hour walk, I have not done a 12-hour walk, but I appreciate the exercise, and not the physical exercise, but the mental exercise of walking. It's very primitive. Many years ago in our Friday meetings, instead of having a meeting, I got everyone, we'd walk like a pack together, right? And we wouldn't discuss business, but it was just an opportunity to walk. And someone described to me, if you look at a pack of dogs walk together. There's a communal sort of piece that goes in it. And it deepened a lot of connection. I don't know how I could put my thumb on this is exactly what it did, but it was very, very connective. And I walk a lot. I live in Costa Rica now. So, nice. For me, being quiet and being silent and being in some cases presence is easier to do when you're walking, right? And sometimes what I think is, how do I record all of this stuff? But that's not the exercise here. You got to switch off all that technology. But let's go back to Antarctica. So for the audience, you soloed across Antarctica, 54 days, pulling a 375-pound sled, right? Which what I thought was so interesting, which was how you had to think and plan what was in that sled. How are you going to survive and stuff? So can you just talk to us about that? Walk us through the journey and what you had to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In 2018, attempting to become the first person in history to cross the entire continent of Antarctica solo, unsupported, as you mentioned. So that means no resupplies of food or fuel along the way, which means you got to take everything with you from the beginning. And that's one of the reasons why this project, although it had been attempted several times over the last 100 years, that no one had successfully accomplished it. Because it's if you took 1,000 pounds of food, is what, enough food and calories, whatever, of course, you wouldn't be able to pull 1,000 pounds anywhere. So you would never get anywhere. Right. And if you took too little, which people have made that mistake, they've had, people have died attempting this crossing. People have had to get emergency evacuated from the continent. And so this kind of crazy math equations that's unsupported. And then the unaided, are also called human powered side of it. People have made this crossing using kites to propel them, with harnessing the power of the wind. You can't have dogs in Antarctica now, but you used to be able to have dogs in Antarctica. So dog sleds and things like that have been used down there, but no one's ever done this crossing kind of in the most primitive and pure way of just mano called manhauling. And so I set my sights on that. And as you mentioned, yeah, there's so many things that went into the planning of it, right? Like every ounce, every gram in that sled has to be, absolutely perfect, or you're not going to get to the other side. I still, lost 30, 40 pounds or something like that because I just couldn't have enough food with me. So part of it was literally, can I handle the starvation? Can I handle the deep hunger while I'm out there for, a couple months at a time? I also didn't bring, it's kind of nasty, but I didn't even bring an extra pair of underwear. I wore the same pair of underwear, the same pair of clothes the entire time, quite literally, because any extra pair of something meant a little more weight and a little bit less food and a little bit less fuel to melt ice and turn it into water, and etc. So it was really slimming down all of the bare essentials. And the more metaphorical side, we can talk some more granular details of specific stories, but it also forced to do that with my mind, right? To quiet my mind, to come into the simpleness and the solitude of the stillness, because fighting against that when you're alone for so long in this place that's trying to kill you, minus 40 degrees, 50, 60, 70 mile per hour winds commonly, it's horrendous. But what was beautiful was I was able to eventually find these places in my mind of deep calm, despite the storm that was raging around me, despite the harshness of the environment, despite the challenge of the place that I was in. We have a choice in our mind. We have a choice. The natural response to something like that is fear, anxiety, being afraid, being heightened. And I certainly had plenty of moments of that while I was out there alone.
Right. And
But I did find the stillness also. And now by the end, I was no longer afraid of the storms, both within and without, and found this deep inner calm across this time in Antarctica.
so how did you go? How did you go from the fear and the anxiety? I think I watched one of your earlier interviews where I think you shared a story where it was like day one and it was kicking in, like, can I do this? And you had a sat phone, right? Like you had connection to
Yeah.
your wife.
Yep. Yeah. So I had a sat phone with me. Pretty much the only person I talked to was my wife, who also is my business partner. Kind of created all these ideas and dreams and projects together. So not only is she my incredible, loving, supportive wife, but also is in the weeds and the details of all the sort of planning and preparation and logistics that go into big effort like this. Yeah. On day one, I get dropped off on the frozen continent, and I'm completely underprepared, turns out. Not only was I out there, but also it turned out I was racing another guy. So that was one unexpected part of kind of twists and turns at the end here there's another guy, this guy named Captain Lewis Rudd, who is also attempting the crossing at the same time. And we'll both get dropped off on the same day by the same plane on the edge of Antarctica to not just race history, but actually to race each other head to head. And on day one, he kicked my butt. Like I could barely move my sled and he disappeared across the horizon. And I thought, from day one, I was already lost, so much so that I started crying. And, I guess it's obvious now, but I didn't realize at the time, when you start crying and it's minus 30, minus 40 degrees outside, it turns out the tears, they freeze to your face, which is the all-time most pathetic feeling. And so there was moments, literally hour one, day one, I thought, I might fail at this. It's not like I thought this was going to be easy and I would be able to do it, no problem. But I thought if I fail, like maybe I'm going to fail on day 30, day 40, day 50. But hour one, day one, I could barely pull my sled and I've got frozen tears smashed in my face. It was like, wow, this is not going well. I remember waking up that first morning after a really kind of failure of a first day and feeling so sorry for myself. I joke around and I say that I wasn't alone in my tent. And it's not because Captain Lou came back for me. It was because I was packed in there with like the 5-6 worst versions of myself. Like I'm packed in there with all the negativity in my mind. Colin, you're an idiot. Colin, you're a fool. This is never going to work. You suck. You're not strong. And I think all of us, maybe not alone in a tent in Antarctica, but in our lives, can relate to that moment. We can be such our own worst, harshest critic. And I certainly was doing that. All the limiting beliefs, all the challenges were bubbling up inside of me. But I'm a firm believer in this concept that we are the stories that we tell ourselves. We are
Correct.
the stories that we tell ourselves, right? In this moment, I was telling myself the worst possible story about how much I sucked, about how weak I was, about how horrible of a person I was, how embarrassing it was I wasn't going to make this crossing. But then I try to cut through the noise, and actually, like the noise in my head and the silence in my head, but the noise inside there, by actually yelling out loud. I stood outside my tent that day, and I ended up doing this every single day for the rest of the crossing. And I yelled out loud at the top of my lungs, Colin, you are strong. You are capable. You are strong. You are capable. And I would just repeat that every time these sort of negative thoughts would roll into my head, as a sort of a mantra to override that negativity.
It's amazing. You know, this is all built in research and science and psychology. This isn't just like warm, fuzzy, you know, speak positive things into the universe and focus on where you want to go. And but it actually it does. It's the incantations, it's the reframing of what we do. And you know, I try to explain this to a lot of people, which is, you know, motivation comes afterwards. It's sort of what you're doing with those thoughts before. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with a father, very intense dude, and very you could see the demons and the internal negative thoughts, and it contributed to a lot of his darkness and sickness later on in life. And I'm super sensitive at what goes in my head, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm a believer that I'm the only person that can actually deal with those thoughts. And you would talk about like our brain or our mind will build up these stories. It does, you know, our stories in our brain can be good or bad. It comes from that same creative place. You know, our brain will start to play these movies, and if we watch them too much, and if we listen to them too much, they become very real, right? It's what we talk about, perceptions equaling fact. Okay, so um mindset. I was interviewing this. You might know him, Sean Swarner. Shout out to Sean.
Mm-hmm.
Also an adventurer, an excellent dude. And he said something once to me where he's like, you know, Greg, the mind will give up before the body does. How true was that for your project and exhibition?
Yeah, for all the expeditions I've been on, all 10 of my world records on their surface, they are very physical. As you said, I'm an endurance athlete. I put myself in these situations, far off place of the world or mountaintops or pushing my body. And of course, I train my body to prepare for them, right? I lift weights, I run, I work on cardio, all the things that you would expect. But I'm very fond of saying, and I firmly believe this, that the most important muscle that any of us have is the 6 inches between our ears, our minds. And I use that word muscle very intentionally to say that people's very quickly reach the conclusion, if you're going to run a marathon, well, you better train your legs to get fit and strong, and your lungs better be healthy and all this kind of stuff. Like, we just know this. Like, that's just like where our brains go, like, immediately. But for whatever reason, there's this disconnect in our own culture around mindset. When people think, I want to get a stronger mind, how do I do that? It's like you got to put your mind through the mental bench press, the mental push-ups, the mental marathon, so to speak, the mental laps. And so for me, so much of my preparation and so much, your question is about the mind or the body. And it's like, yeah, the body's important, but really not important at all if that mindset's not there. And you need to actually strengthen that muscle. There's lots of ways to do that. For me, that's been through meditation, that's been through visualization, that's been by actually testing my body and seeing what occurs in my mind and reflecting on that later to strengthen it. But the fact of the matter is, just like any muscle, if you don't use it, it'll atrophy. And so the mind is the most powerful muscle and the most important. I could have trained to pull a 375-pound sled in Antarctica and gotten super fit and strong and capable of doing that, and not made it past that first day of these challenges if my mind hadn't been right in the way that it was, or at least capable of flexing and getting stronger over time.
You mentioned visualization, very powerful exercise. Many years ago, they did experiments is the wrong word, but research where they took runners and they had them sit in a chair and they had them close their eyes and they hooked them up to all the biofeedback sort of, you know, suckers and had them sit there and they said, okay, we're going to fire a starter gun and we want you to visualize running the race.
Mm-hmm.
What they picked up was every muscle that should have fired in the order that it should have fired in, fired. Like all
Hmm.
nerves started activating, right? And that really started to begin early days, the importance of how powerful visualization is, right? So What else do you do? Visualization, meditation. What are some other best practices to get that mental bench press? I love the fact you described it as mental bench press.
Well, really, this entire call to action that I have with my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, is an accessible exercise. And it's mind, body, and spirit, but a lot of it has to do with solitude. A lot of it has to do with self-awareness and silence. I mean, you could call it a walking meditation of sorts, but the prescription is very simple. I guess there's a whole book about this. And yes, I recommend people pick up the book. It's entertaining. It's got a lot of gems about mindset and all this, but the call to action can be summed up in a tweet, like in 2 sentences. Like, walk out your front door, put your phone on airplane mode, don't bring music or podcast with you, and walk alone in silence. You can take as many breaks as you want. I literally don't care if you go for 1 mile or 50 miles, but in our connected society, and I'm no different. I love social media. I'm on social media. I'm on the internet. You and I are talking because we have these tools. It's amazing, right? But there is a time and a place with so many robust tools. We can constantly distract ourselves. We have a society where we can actually distract ourselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so one of the things that I'm trying to inspire people to do, and I've already seen the life-changing benefits, the thousand people have already gone this walk, is the walk is, yes, walking moves endorphins and dopamine and things like that. And there's some science behind what happens with the actual physical motion of walking. Mm-hmm. But the power of the 12-hour walk is not a physical exercise. I tell people this over and over and over again. Yeah, your feet might be a little tired by the end, sure. But I'm telling you, take as many breaks as you want. I don't care. The real exercise is being silent and within your own thoughts. And what I find happening, and why 12 hours, well, there's a reason behind that. It has to do with my time in Antarctica, et cetera, et cetera. But more than anything, it's a long enough time for people to go, oh my God, 12 hours. It's like a whole waking hours of a whole day. Like, it's intimidating, right? But it's intentionally outside of your comfort zone. It's intentionally something beyond what you have tried or beyond what you have achieved, most likely with this. But more than anything, what I find is people walk in the first couple of hours and they say to me, oh God, the first few hours, like, I was alone in my thoughts. I haven't been alone in my thoughts basically ever, because I always had the TV on, or my kid's talking to me, or I'm listening to a podcast. We distract ourselves constantly. And those first few hours, what ends up happening for most people is they start kind of spinning on like the surface level stuff, the to-do list, the schedule for the drop off of this, or, maybe some fight you're having with your spouse or your boss, or you're like, I should have said this, I should have said that, like whatever, just like right. And look, my brain is just like this. I think we're all similar in this way. But then what happens is you're out there long enough over the course of the 12 hours that at some point, your mind goes, okay, I've spun out on all the monkey mind surface level stuff that I like just need to like chatter. It starts to quiet down and your mind goes a little bit deeper, and then a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. The amount of people that have told me who have finished a 12-hour walk, they're like, the entire experience was incredible, ups and downs throughout the entire way. But the last hour or the last 30 minutes was where it just kept getting deeper and deeper in the silence and the stillness. So that's one exercise. And that's obviously not something you can do every single day. You can bring in a silence and solitude or meditation, in a more bite-sized daily chunk, in the 10 or 20 minutes in this. But sometimes it's great to have a fully immersive kind of deep cut, so to speak, to really kick off that journey. And what I'm so excited about the 12-hour walk is the profound benefits of it. But before I kind of discovered this, would always talk about, I walked across Antarctica, so I've climbed Everest twice. And people are like, oh, that's amazing. You've cultivated your mind so well. But look, I'm not going to fly to Antarctica and walk across it by myself. That's not the reality of my life, right? Or just my own passion, or I don't want to go freeze my butt off in the middle of nowhere by myself. Right. And I get that. What's so exciting to me about the 12-hour walk and this global movement is you can do it anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I actually recommend that people do it out their front doors, even if they live in a bustling city. Mm-hmm. And that's because that experience starts to imprint on your day-to-day life. It's not I was on vacation and I had this experience and I did this thing on this beautiful nature trail. I'm not saying don't walk on a beautiful nature trail. Yeah. But what I am saying is by having this experience out your front door, in your neighborhood, in your community, a week from now, when you're back in your community and you're commuting to work and you cross an intersection 5 miles from your house, you go, oh, I remember when I walked past here and I was toiling this in the mind. It anchors those lessons deeper in your day to day rather than it being a disconnect from this other, experience I had, separate from my life. It integrates the lessons into your daily life. And so it's been fun for those that are curious about it. There's a whole website around it, 12hourwalk.com, completely free to sign up, for free to do it, but you can put your name in, pick a date. I become your accountability partner through that to just sort of like say, hey, you said you're doing this on October 15th, you're a month out. Here's some things to think about planning. Oh, what do I eat? Where do I go to the bathroom? Of course, there's FAQs on there, things like that around the logistics. But more than anything, 12 hours, and strangely, is a long amount of time, but it's also nothing. It's one day. It's not even a whole day. It's a half of day that you commit to that can have a life-changing ripple effect throughout the many, many years to come.
Hey, so sorry to interrupt, and thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you like today's episode and you want to learn more about some of our programs like the Better Leader program that can change your life, go ahead and click the link below. Amazing. I was reading in your first book, Impossible First, and obviously 12-Hour Walk is the expanded position, but I was really interested in the story behind the 12-Hour Walk. Can you share that with us?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Captain Lou really kicked my butt right out of the gates there. I disappeared across the horizon, and I thought I'd probably never see him again. But I was determined to continue to kind of put one foot in front of the other and see if I could just complete the crossing, sort of agnostic to if I could win this race. Mm-hmm. But to my complete and utter surprise, on day 6 of this journey, just a week in, I spot his tent on the horizon. I was like, I can't believe it. I've caught up to him. And so I try to kind of sneak past him. It's a whiteout day in Antarctica. And as I'm just kind of quietly trying to go past, keep in mind, I'm moving really slow. I'm pulling 300 some pounds. So it's like everything is really slow going. It's like,
and then the crunching of the snow, right?
Yeah. It's like, and he hears it obviously. And then I hear this coughing and he sticks his head outside of the tent and he starts kind of waving at me. I kind of like joke around, like I thought he was like the king of England, like this kind of slow, like wave through, 2 guys in the middle of Antarctica alone in a whiteout. Now, Antarctica this time of year is 24 hours of daylight. So you've got 24 hours of daylight, sun directly overhead. But in a whiteout, the clouds come in and sometimes there's blowing snow. And as humans, we actually can't walk in a straight line very well without visual cues. So like imagine walking down a dark hallway with your eyes closed. Like you're going to smash into the wall like in a few steps. Like we just actually can't anchor without being able to see very easily.
Right.
And so the only way to navigate in a whiteout in Antarctica, it's white on white on white, like so much so that at one point I took not this day, but a different day, I took 10 steps away from my sled, which was bright yellow, thinking, I'm just going to walk 10 steps in this direction. I turn around, I can't see my sled. I have no idea 360 degrees in which direction I just walked from. Like that is how disorienting these whiteouts are. So the only way to navigate in a whiteout is to have a compass strapped to your chest that you're staring at. And you're literally second to second, minute to minute, staring at this compass needle, trying to keep it in the right direction, in this case, pointing south towards the South Pole, where I was headed at this point. So I'm doing this for several hours. And as you can imagine, it's already slow going. But when you have to navigate like one step to the right, one step to the left, one step to keep you on track, it's excruciatingly slow going. Mm-hmm. After a certain period of time, I look behind myself, wondering what's happened to Captain Lou. And I look behind myself, and he's about 100 feet behind me, but he's got no compass. He's just watching me navigate through this whiteout and letting me be his guidepost. So I'm doing all the work and he's just kind of drafting me. And I'm like, oh man, like
all the experience versus youth.
Exactly. And he's got all the experience, way more experience than I have. And he's just like chilling, watching me do this. So I'm frustrated and I finally slow down and I force him to come up beside me. And he comes up beside me in this whiteout. And I'll never forget, he's in this like chipper, good mood, which I'm surprised by because he's usually kind of like an intense guy. And he's like, hey, good morning, mate. He's like, I got a bit of a suggestion for you in his British accent. I'm like, a suggestion? Like we're in this like insane 1,000-mile battle across Antarctica. We've both like, announced to our, me to the New York Times, him to like the London Herald, like, I'm going to be the first, whatever. And now all of a sudden out here, he's like just all chipper. Like, I'm going to give you a suggestion. He's also a British military special forces guy. Like this guy's like a total badass.
Like an intense dude.
A really intense dude. And I'm thinking, there's no way that this guy just giving me like a friendly like piece of advice out here. And so I stop him short, at least instinctually. This is what I do. I say, Lou, we both know the stakes out here. We know that someone has died attempting this crossing. We know how intense it can be. And I was like, look, I'm not wishing you any personal ill will. However, let this be the last time we speak. No, I don't want a suggestion. No, I don't want to chit chat with you out here. Like, we are supposed to be out here alone. Like, that's it. I kind of draw a line in the proverbial snow, I guess, so to speak. And I remember how he lifts his eye mask, or we have these face masks on, right? Because we can't have any exposed skin. You get frostbite in a couple of minutes. So we've got ski goggles on and full face mask. We can't really see each other's faces, but he lifts his face mask up at me and he stares me like in the eye. I remember just going, okay, suit yourself. And the way he said it was as if like the suggestion he was going to give me was going to like unlock the full,
Right.
fine, suit yourself, whatever, you know? But then the funniest part about it all was like, I was like, I'll see you later. And we're both still pulling 300 some pound sleds, moving at like a snail's pace or a tortoise's pace. So it was like, you say, see you later. I'm not going to talk to this guy. We're still standing shoulder to shoulder next to each other, going in the same direction. It's not like you can like speed off, you know, in some other direction. And so before we know it, we're locked in this silent battle. But now we are literally shoulder for shoulder, ski for ski, stride for stride, hour after hour after hour. And a couple of days before that, my wife had been trying to encourage me over the satellite phone. And she said, look, you're not going far enough per day. You're going to run out of food at some point. You know, she was just calculating backwards. I still had, 50 days of food, but she's like, look, at this mileage, 50 days from now, you're going to run out of food and you're going to be 200 miles away from the finish. You got to figure out how to like get more out of each day. And I remember her saying to me, can you go an extra? Because I thought 10 hours of that furthest I could ever go. Like that was my limiting belief.
Each day, 10 hours.
10 hours, 10 hours, 10 hours. Like, and that's a long time. I mean, it's like 10 hours every day without a break.
Just walking. Like, how you give everyone an opportunity to take a break during their 12-hour walk.
Right. So that was fixed in my mind. And I'd done a little, obviously I crossed Greenland to train for this. I've been in Antarctica once before. And 10 hours was like at the end of a 10-hour day, I was just like max. I was like, there's no way I could go further than that. And I didn't have enough food because I couldn't carry enough to actually fuel me enough calories. So I'm also hungry. I'm on a calorie deficit. Just like that just seemed like the full limit. And so she had said to me earlier, can you go further? And I was like, absolutely not. But as I start walking beside Lou this day in this silent battle now, I say to myself emotionally, I'm like, this is a make or break moment. Like, this is a moment where I'm not going to win this race. There's still like 1,000 miles, 900 some miles to go. But this is a moment where the emotional advantage is going to come into play. It was like a staring contest. Like, who's going to stop first?
Right. Who's going to blink? And
so I say to myself, there's no way that I'm going to let him keep walking further than me. So instead of it, I kind of wipe out time from my mind this day. And I go, I'm going to go at least one step further than he goes today, no matter what happens. And I haven't talked to him in depth about this, although we have remained friends.
That was going to be my next question. Still friends?
If we weren't friends then, but I shouldn't say we remained friends. We became friends afterwards. Because I think there's a level of mutual respect and camaraderie of what we've experienced together. But in the heat of this is in the heat of the battle. And so I keep pushing that day, and 8 hours goes by. He's still right beside me. 9 hours goes by. He's still right beside me. 10 hours goes by. He's still right beside me. I'm like, we're at the 10-hour mark. Like, he's got us. And I know he doesn't usually go more than 10 hours either. 10 and a half hours goes by, still just trudging along. 11 hours goes by. And I'm like, now at this point, I'm like questioning my own a bit. Like, am I going to screw myself up on day 6? And like, what's the cost of the toll on my body? And can I recover for tomorrow? All these sorts of things, getting late in the day. And finally, just after about 11 hours, I finally see him stop, and he reaches down and he pulls out his tent from his sled. And I'm like, yes, I've got him. Like, I've got him, at least in this moment. And I am so exhausted that I can barely put one foot in front of the other. But I kind of play it off, or at least pretend in my mind. I was like, I'm going to go one more hour. I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a true lead in this race. And I'm going maybe 1 mile per hour. I mean, it's so slow going. But I commit to that final hour, and I make it 12 hours that day.
Wow. And
I take my first true lead in the race, which I end up maintaining the rest of the way, but only because it's extremely hard earned. And as I go to bed that night, 2 things happen. One, my wife reminds me, like, I told you it's great you did this today, and I'm so proud of you for passing Lou. But she was always like kind of like giving me like the tough, like, you know, the
Okay.
truth, right? She was also like, but if you go back to 10 hours per day, it's going to be the same thing, which is you might not stay in front of Lou, but more than anything, like you're just not going to make it. Like you're not, like the math is not, now that we know how fast and far you're going, like the math just doesn't check out. Even if you factor in the sled gets lighter on the second half and you're going to go a few more miles, you know, per each one of those days, but you're going to be so much more tired. And so in that moment, it was an interesting thing. And I think this is an important lesson for anyone around mindset, which is once I did it once, I was like, oh, if I can do it once, can I do it twice? And then after I did it the next day, if I can do it twice, can I do it 3 times? If I can do it 3 times, can I do it one more time? And I literally didn't say to myself, 12 hours is what I'm going to do for the next 50 days. I actually said, let me see if I can do it one more day. Oh, well, let's see if I can do it 3 days in a row. And eventually 12 hours became my normal day every single day. And I didn't take a single break. And after 54 days, I completed the crossing on essentially my very last bite of food.
Wow.
And so there's a couple lessons. One, the 12-hour walk and the 12 hours is derivative of this for sure. But it's also, when you look back, my wife was right? Like, it doesn't seem that much difference, 10 or 12 hours, but multiplied over 50 days, that's 100 hours. That's, 100 and some plus miles. And I was on my last bite of food when I got there on that. So had I, had even one less day or one break or one half day or one not, I wouldn't have made it.
Wow.
And so it made all the difference for sure.
No kidding. No kidding. I mean, what a powerful story, acknowledging one foot in front of the other, right? One more marker. So, okay, let me do one more day at 12 hours. All right, let me do the next 2 days. And it's just one step at a time. I want to ask you this. Do you think you would have done that if he wasn't there?
So it's a question I've been asked a lot, and it's a question I've asked myself a lot. And where I've come out on it is, and him and I have talked about this actually. I ended up beating him by about 2 or 3 days. It was a race. I'm proud to be first. I also think what he accomplished out there is extraordinary. The truth of the matter is, we both acknowledge this to ourselves, is we don't believe that either one of us would have made the crossing had the other person not been there. The competition definitely elevated, so much so that I never saw Lou again after the 6th day ever. I waited for him at the finish because I wanted to be able to congratulate him in person and not just disappear from Antarctica and never see him again. So I waited there for him and congratulated him at the finish. But from day 6 to day 56 or 57, I finished on day 54. I never saw him, but I saw him in my mind every single day, almost every hour of every single day. I literally found myself looking over my shoulder, like sometimes, which is a ridiculous thing to do because Antarctica is so vast, even though we're heading in the same direction, that the odds of on day 40 of him just like, showing up on my right shoulder is like nearly impossible. But it was still this idea of this other person out there. And it also gave me strength. So as I mentioned, I didn't take any rest days. Typically in polar travel, when the weather's always bad, but there's extremely bad days, 50, 60 mile per hour headwinds, minus 70-degree wind chill, completely exhausted. And on those days, what the normal thing to do is to sit them out. Is to sit in your tent and be like, the wind is too high today. This is a rest day. I'm going to take this day to fix gear, rest, recover, sleep, and so I'm stronger tomorrow. But what Lou and I were doing with this unsupported crossing of the distance we were trying to cross, it didn't allow for a rest day in terms of supplies. But I had planned rest days. Before I knew this was a race, I was like, of course I'm going to take rest days. There's no way I can do this without taking some rest days. But every time the weather got that bad and I'm inside of my tent, I don't know if you've ever been inside of a tent in a massive windstorm, like it is loud and it's rattling. And I'm thinking in my head, it's minus 70 out there. I should take the day off. I had this conversation with myself over and over again, bargaining with myself. I should take the day off. And then I conjured up this thought of Captain Lou, and I go, that guy is such a badass. If I take the day off and he doesn't take the day off, and I spent all this time gaining this lead incrementally, day by day, a half a mile here, a mile there, this, that, the other thing, am I going to just give it all up because I was too afraid to go? And it turns out if I had taken any rest days, I wouldn't have made it because I would have run out of food or run out of supplies, etc. And so for sure, the competition elevated me. And one last funny story on that point is that about day, I don't know, 42, 43, something like that, I just passed the South Pole. And I called my wife every single night to have these medical check-ins. You know, she kind of checking on my mental health and well-being and asked me how much food I ate and trying to say some loving things to me. And to be clear, talking on a stat phone, it's not like talking on your iPhone. It's not like a chit-chat, easy conversation. It's like crackly and garbled and delayed and whatever, but you can communicate a little bit. And I asked her this one night, I've been thinking about it all day. And I said, is Lou real? She's like, excuse me?
I was going to ask you that.
I was like, is there actually a British Special Forces guy out here? I keep thinking there is, but I haven't seen him in 40 days. I literally, in my own mind, got to this place. But the funniest thing about it is that instead of being afraid, instead of being like, wow, I've completely lost my mind out here, which in some senses I had, right? Without any framework or context to bounce ideas off of, any person to ask advice from, I thought to myself, you know what? It doesn't matter, because one of two things is true. There either really is this British Special Forces guy chasing me out here and it's motivating me to keep going, or my imagination is so rich that I created this archetype of this badass British Navy SEAL guy following me out here, and it's motivating the hell out of me to get out of my tent every single day. So either way, it's fine. It's working.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What I also love about your story is you have your nemesis, your competition that didn't, you were competing against them, but you were really competing against yourself to keep pushing. But then the other side of that, which is that support, right? Your wife, right, in your corner. And I think in life, when it comes down to mindset, we need both. You know, we need the competition that keeps driving us. We need the community or the partner that, you know, reminds us to stay on track. And sometimes is the partner that helps us reframe things, right?
Totally.
So important, man. Awesome. I love your story. I could spend another like 10 hours with you, right? And an hour per record. So this is where you're now birthed, or what now creates the 12-hour walk, and what an incredible tool. So I got a couple more questions, but one of them being, what's common for people, like when people are signing up for the 12-hour walk and doing the challenge and going through the template, what are some of the common reasons people are coming with? Are they trying to gain more confidence? Are they trying to push themselves? I'm sure it's a wide, but you know, are there common sort of challenges, issues, stresses that you hear from people that they say, this is the reason I'm coming to do this?
Yeah, I mean, what one thing I do love about the 12-hour walk is it's so accessible, and people have done. I mean, an 81-year-old guy accomplished it. You know, young, old, rich, poor, different set of certain, doesn't matter. Like, this is a good exercise for everyone because it meets you where you're at, and people come at it from many different vantage points. The book itself breaks down what I consider to be the 10 most common limiting beliefs that we all face. These are things we've all battled with. I'm not living my best life because I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. I'm not strong enough. I'm afraid to fail. I hate being uncomfortable. What if people criticize me, right? Like, I think if you're a human being, you pretty much had all of these thoughts at some point in life, most likely. And if you haven't had any of them, I'd love to meet you, because you're like, you know, impervious to any negativity or doubt in your own mind. It's incredible. And so not all of those limiting beliefs are present for every single person in every single moment, right? Like I don't have enough money. That's present for a lot of people, but there's of course wealthy people where that's not their limiting belief. Their limiting belief is about time. So the 12-hour walk can meet you where you're at. I also find that a lot of people, one of the pieces that I'm really passionate about talking about as it relates to the 12-hour walk, but it relates to mindset in general, which is intuition. And I think it's often talked about, but it's also often overlooked. I really do believe that it's maybe the most powerful part of this. I was on an expedition on K2 in winter a year and a half ago. I ended up losing 5 friends in a really tragic climbing accident. I won't get into all the details. You can read that story in the book in more granular detail. But the long story short is my intuition saved my life. In that moment, which was interesting, because I'm the guy who keeps pushing, the guy who does hard stuff, the guy who keeps going an extra hour to fight off the British guy. And in this moment, something about my intuition told me to hold back, and it ultimately saved my life that night. But why that's powerful and why that's more relative to not being in a life and death circumstances. I think we have the answer, particularly to the big questions in our life. So consider this. You get offered a job, you got teenage kids, they're happy in school, they've got a thriving community, they're in sports teams or whatever, and you get offered this job and it's a 50% raise, but you got to uproot and move your family to the other side of the country. I don't know if that's the right answer. And what most people do is they do a big to-do list, or they ask all their friends and their mentors and they're this, they're that, or whatever.
Mhm.
And what I realize is it's not bad to ask other people's advice and make the to-do list, but in the big questions, like, you actually know the answer. Or another example would be, you've been in a relationship for a few years. The person you're with they seem great. You're happy. You seem to be in love, and you're thinking, should I marry this person? I don't know the answer for that for you. You don't know the answer for that for somebody else, but
Mhm.
you know the answer.
Right.
But so rarely do we give ourselves the time to have that inner voice speak up. And so one of the ways that people encounter the 12-hour walk is they say, I know I've got a big decision to make. I've got something on my mind. I've done all the to-do lists. I've asked everyone, but like, I still can't. And I'm like, go spend 12 hours by yourself. And
Mm.
almost every time, if not every time, someone comes back and is like, oh,
I
I,
know what to do.
I know what to do. And that's great. Another one is, I'm fond of asking this question, what's your Everest? What's your Everest? My childhood dream was climbing Mount Everest. So I asked people that through my nonprofit school kids. I asked that to adults. I asked that to corporate. And I just think it's a great leading question. It's a simple question, right? It's an obvious metaphor. Well, what's your big goal? What's your big hope? What's your big dream? It doesn't have to be about achievement. It doesn't have to be about actually climbing a mountaintop. It can be about impacting a million lives, making $1 million, entrepreneurship, love, creativity. It doesn't matter, right? But what is that for you? What lights you up? What's your passion? What's your purpose? And a lot of people have an answer to that question. My Everest is X. And they take the time in the 12-hour walk to think about, well, what are my next steps towards getting me there? And what do I need to shift about my mindset that's impeding me from actually reaching that mountaintop? But there's also, what I have found is a whole other subset of people, which is still a significant amount of people, who ask the question. I say, what's your Everest? And they sheepishly, as if that there's something wrong with this, say, well, I don't know what my Everest is. I don't have that true deep North Star, that true calling in my life right now. And I think sometimes we find ourselves in those phases, these inflection point moments, right?
Correct. Correct. And there are reflection points.
Yeah. And what's so great about the 12-hour walk for that person is, I say, well, then use the 12-hour walk to ask this question. What is my Everest? Not what's my Everest and how do I get there? But if I don't know what my Everest is, literally spend that time in your own thoughts, thinking about what lights you up, what gets you excited. And if you can come back after 12 hours of reflection and go, you know what? I have some clarity. I'm getting my intuitive being pulled in this direction or that direction, or this is something I want to spend more time on or focus on. That's a beautiful thing too. So there's really so many different ways to go on, and there's a million different flavors of that. But the one unifying truth is, we're all dealing with different things in our own life on any given day. And taking a day out of your life to ponder, to be alone, to reflect, to have self-awareness has an over-indexing result on, turns out, 12 hours. If I could tell you by the end of, by sunset tonight, you're going to have a deep revelation and strength and mindset about the whole next chapter of your life. Like, that seems like, wow, that seems like a really small amount of time.
Sure, for sure. Right. We schedule ourselves with such junk all the time that
Constantly.
I will say we're busy. I love what you talk about. For me, I've always spent and appreciated my quiet time. So usually every day, 8 o'clock at night, or maybe even earlier, 7. And I'm in Costa Rica now. So now you got the sunset that goes down. And the most amazing thing that I've realized about Costa Rica is people will stop and they will watch the sunset. Tourists will come and yank their phones out and start filming the sunset, but it's a time to pause and to be quiet and that's just it's a different example. But I love sitting in silence. I think it is, it's my Buddha in me, which just, it's where I go deep into those thoughts and stuff. And I love this exercise of the 12-hour walk. I'm going to do it. I'm 1,000% going to do it. I'm going to message.
Amazing.
This is my walk. All right. At the end of the show, we all come to the better human question, which I think I know what your answer is going to be, and you could say it again. But what do you think we all need to do to be better humans tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the exercise, the 12-hour walk is an exercise, but the deeper layer of that is introspection. Um, I think that we live in a culture that says self-care is for some reason selfish. You should help others. And obviously, I'm deeply passionate about helping others and having impact at scale. I have an explicit goal set of having 10 million people complete the 12-hour walk.
Mm-hmm.
But that can only happen. You can only have that greater impact with others after you look inward, after you take care of yourself. We've all heard the put your oxygen mask on first before helping others kind of analogy. And I fundamentally believe that. So to become better humans, but more importantly, better as humanity, I think that it really rests on all of our shoulders to take a deep look inward, introspectively, learn about ourselves so that we can teach and have that ripple effect of positivity for others.
It's amazing, amazing. I love how I'll just paraphrase, let's take the time to be silent and reflective and introspective, but let's also recognize that, we can't isolate and we have a responsibility to really contribute to other people's well-being. Your story is a story of one foot in front of the other, man. It's incredible, and it's applicable, and it's relatable, and it's, actionable. So that's what I loved hearing from you today. Everything you spoke about was, this is what we do, or this is what I've done, this is what works, and this is the action to take. And I don't think enough people take action in life. So to the audience, if you take one thing from this episode today, go on a 12-hour walk, right? Definitely pick up Colin's new book. And on that note, Colin, tell us about your books and where we can get them and where we can find you and where we can come and, connect with you and ask you questions, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so two books. First one, The Impossible First, New York Times bestseller memoir, all about that Antarctica crossing. So we only just scratched the surface, a few of those stories that we share, but there's a whole book about that journey and that crossing. And then my most recent book is The 12-Hour Walk. We've talked all about it. I think you'll really enjoy it, the book and the walk. There's a whole digital ecosystem that helps support the walk, and it helps you support you in your walk. It doesn't support me, it helps support you, which is 12hourwalk.com. Just tons of resources. You can sign up. It's free. I become your accountability partner. So go to the 12hourwalk.com, sign up, pick a date. If you actually pick a date and put it on your calendar, it turns out it's like 99% more likely that you're actually going to do it rather than saying, oh, I'm going to do it one day. So if you're inspired in this moment, go to the 12hourwalk.com right now, sign up, pick a date, put it on your calendar. Sign up with a few of your friends. You're going to be walking alone, but together you're all, hey, we're going to do this all next Saturday. And then we're going to get together for dinner afterwards and reflect and integrate on our experience. I also have an app that I built that helps. It works in airplane mode, but it tracks your walk and you can see where you are so you don't get lost, but it also does get bogged down in your own texts and emails while you're trying to check Google Maps. So the 12-Hour Walk app is for that. And then I'm on Instagram, Colin O'Brady, just my name, pretty active on there and on social. So yeah, come say hi. Definitely take the 12-hour walk. It's a budding global community. We've had people in, I don't know, 40, 50 countries at this point already doing it, and it's just growing from there. So anyone who's listening out there, anywhere around the world, I encourage you to take this walk. You won't be sorry.
It's amazing. I'll share a quick little story just before we go. During the height of COVID, a few friends would get together and we would walk. And like this was when everything was locked down. You would be in the snow and whatnot. It was quiet. And same thing. We'd walk by ourselves, but we would do it as a group. Colin, you were the definition of a better human being, maybe an amazing legend of a human being. And I'm excited to keep in touch and very excited to read your next book. Love the first one. Love the way you write. Love your stories. Powerful and super relatable. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share, and we will see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you're going to love the next one.